kind of person that says, okay, I want to not just be anti-war, but I want to be anti-war with people. I want my relationships to be peaceful with the people that are around me. That, you realize that you can have lots and lots of stuff, and if you're at odds with the people that you even live with, it doesn't feel so good. And so we're going to talk about what it means to be peacemakers in our relationships today. Now, when I was growing up, I grew up with an older brother and two younger sisters. The two younger sisters really didn't matter. They were kind of, young. Okay. Well, my brother and I, we used to play all the time together. Nothing dissing on girls here, just my family. All right. But my brother and I, we would go to war with each other. Now, my brother uniquely was about twice my size. We're about the same size now. Matter of fact, I even weigh a little bit more than he does. But he's a little skinny, rail guy now. But we used to fight all the time. And this isn't a picture of us, but it kind of represents what our relationship was really like. My brother, because he was so much bigger than me, he would always put the stranglehold on me, and we'd be wrestling around. My mom would always say, what moms say, somebody's gonna get hurt, which in this case always meant me. And I don't know, why didn't she just say, Bruce, you're gonna get hurt? But at the end of the day, she would try to stand us toe to toe. This is a picture of gals, so girls do this too. But she would always say, okay, now face each other, shake hands, and say you're sorry. We're going like, and I could never really figure out why I had to say I was sorry for getting beat up. That's something I just still to this day I just never figured that one out. But my mom had good intentions. What she was trying to do was to teach us how to be peacemakers. And in spite of the fact that we, have this argument or this fight, that we can shake hands and say we're sorry and things are going to be okay. That's a simplistic way to look at it. But we know that it's not just about sibling rivalry or wrestling around in the carpet that James is talking about here. Because why? Because there are fights in the workplace. I don't know if this was taken at your office, but that wouldn't be very good. There are fights in relationships in marriage. Marriages are well known. If you're married, you've had a fight. We just know that to be the truth. It happens, but it doesn't have to be the defining thing that happens in your life and your relationship. There's also conflict in politics. We know that, especially about once every 4 years. It gets really, really heated, right? All these debates going on and stuff. But we know that you can be at odds with each other. Also, believe it or not, there are fights that happen in the church. Okay? I don't know if you've been a part of a church fight before, where I grew up Baptist, so this was like kind of standard fare. But, people were at odds with each other. They just, I want my way, you want your way. And that is really the bedrock of the problem, isn't it? And so James kind of goes after this, and he says, here, we need to identify what is the problem with people and fighting. What really is it that breaks peace? He says in chapter 4 of James, verse 1 through 3, what is causing the quarrels and fights among you? Isn't it a whole army of evil desires that war within you? You want what you don't have, so you scheme and kill to get it. You are jealous for what others have, and you can't possess it, so you fight and you quarrel to take it away from them. It's just interesting that we sit here and we talk about what is the real problem. Well, the real problem is in us. Is every one of us are wired to be selfish. That is the fallen nature. We want what we want, how we want it, when we want it, how we want it. It's just the way it is. And so how do we deal with this bedrock idea that the number one and pervasive reason why we have struggles staying peaceful with each other is because of our selfishness. We want what we want, or we want what we don't have. And we'll scheme to get it. Okay? Now this could also mean that we want to keep what we have. And someone else is intruding on that. I've worked so hard for this. I want to maintain my security, my peace, my sense of control. And someone is messing with that, and I'll do anything I can, however I need to do it in order to keep that the way I want it. So it's kind of both and, right? So James here is trying to school us on how can you be peacemakers in the middle of the truth that we are all selfish people. he starts out by letting us know why we don't get what we want in the first place. In the next verse, he says this. He says, and yet the reason you don't have what you want is that you don't ask God for it. And you say, well, wait a second. I ask God for what I want. Well, do you really? You see, deep down inside, James says there's a struggle going on inside you. There's this thing that's at war inside your heart. You want what you want, and yet you don't get it, and so you're going to go to war for it. And you say, well, the number one reason why you don't have what you want is because you don't ask God for it. What does that mean? Well, I think most of us, because, our ancestors ate the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, we have this inherent knowledge of what's right and what's wrong. And so sometimes we're not going to ask God for something. Why? Because we know that He's not going to give it to us. Have you ever done that scenario? You want your way, you want your stuff, you want your thing to happen, you want to win this argument, and yet you know deep down, God's not going to be on your side on this. He's not going to give you this. It's not godly. This is just selfish. And so sometimes we don't ask God for what we want because we know He's not going to give it to us anyway, so why go there? All right? Or you've been disappointed in the past. You've asked God for something, and He hasn't delivered. And so you've abandoned God in favor of doing your own thing your own way, thinking that will bring you peace. Well, it kind of leads into the second idea. He says, and even when you do ask, you don't get it because the whole motive is wrong. You only want what will give you pleasure. Wow. That's kind of like a window into your soul. Why do we want what we want? We want what we want because we want it. We want it not because it's going to hurt us or harm us. We think our life is going to be genuinely better if we win this argument. If we get our way. If those people will just live their life according to me. Right? And if they would, everything can be rosy, everything can be great. And yet the truth of it is that God doesn't give us what we want because it's not good for us all the time. See, if you want God to respond positively to your requests, what you have to do is ask what you know He wants you to have. Well, we know what God wants us to have. Love, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Wow. See, those are all things that He says, yeah, I want those things, and I want you to have them in abundance. So why are we asking for those things? Well, because they're going to cost us. Right? They're not things that, are going to just make us feel good. Those are things that sometimes are giving ourselves away. We're helping others instead of just taking in for our own pleasure. And so He says, the reason you don't get what you ask from God most of the time is because your motives are wrong. It's all about your pleasure instead of becoming the person that God wants you to become. And third, I think one of the huge things in our society is that we get deceived into believing in a false peace. In other words, the world says you can achieve peace in another way. You can achieve happiness and security and comfort. And man, if you live life according to the world, if you have all this stuff and people will treat you the way you want them to treat you, everything will be fine without God. You don't need God in your life. Well, people have tried that, right? Well, if we believe that peace is achievable without God, we're mistaken. Because God is our Creator. He is the one who designed how we are supposed to live and relate to Him and others. And if we don't live that way, it's not going to be peaceful for us. And so he goes on in verse 4 and 5. He says, so, you adulterers, don't you realize that friendship with this world is really hatred toward God? Do you realize that friendship with the world makes you an enemy of God? That's pretty strong language, isn't it? Now, he's not saying that you can't have any friends that are not Christians. He's not saying that you can't enjoy the things that God has given you. You can't enjoy a beautiful sunset or, a trip to the beach or good food. He's not saying you can't enjoy that stuff. What he is saying is if you focus on that as your goal, right? He says, I say it again, that if your aim is to enjoy this world, you can't be a friend of God. You see, we can live our life one of two ways. We can say, I am God's creation, and I'm here to live out my life the way He designed me to live and relate to Him and other people. And that's very clearly spelled out in the Bible. It's not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing if we live that way. But if we focus our whole life on our own pleasure, I mean, I go to school to get a good paying job so I can buy lots of stuff. I can go on vacations I want to go on. I can be the kind of person I want to be and have the stuff I want. If that's your goal in life, it's going to be a sad life. Because those things will not fill you up, will not give you the satisfaction ultimately that your heart knows that you need. And so, what is your aim in life, really? And then he says this, very interesting. He says, so what do you think? What do you think the scripture means when it says the Holy Spirit whom God has placed within you jealously longs for us to be faithful? In other words, what he's saying is don't you get that how much God has done for you? Don't you get how much God has sacrificed in order to win you back, to forgive you your sin? All the grace that's been poured out into your life that you didn't deserve? Don't you get that? And it's not for God's benefit, it's for our benefit. You see, God knows how He designed us to relate to Him, to relate to each other in peace. And when we break that peace with either Him or other people, our life is going to be a wreck. And so what happens is God says, I jealously long for you to have a wonderful life that I've designed for you in the first place. I want that so bad that I'm willing to sacrifice my own son, Jesus, on the cross to die a painful, terrible death to pay the penalty for sin so that you can have your relationship restored with God and other people. Don't you get it, he's saying? So God is jealous for our relationship. So what is the true way of peace that God provides? How do we restore peace when there's been fracturing, when there's been broken relationships? Well, I think that James leads us to this place now where he says, I want you to understand about God's grace. I want you to understand what it took in the first part to mend that relationship between you and God. And then that will color all your other relationships. And it'll help you understand how you can be a person of peace. So the first thing he says in verse 6, he goes on, he says, so God opposes the proud, but favors or gives grace to the humble. So humble ourselves, humble yourselves before God. This idea that since God has poured out His grace on us, how is grace received? Grace is received, first of all, through humility. It is us saying to God, I don't deserve this. I have sinned. I have lived in a way that hasn't been pleasing to you or other people. And I confess that as sin, and I accept your free pardon through Jesus. It's humbling yourself. And that humility is the start of peacemaking. Now, have you ever heard the phrase, it takes two to tango? Normally, that is used in reference to an argument, right? Well, you know, it takes two to tango. Now, I know if you have a Mennonite brother background, you probably don't get this because you don't dance, all right? But those of us who grew up Baptist, we get it, all right? But, you know, the whole idea of the dance. Now, when you think of dancing, anybody watch, you know, Dancing with the Stars?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay. How about So You Think You Can Dance? How about that one? That's better. Yeah. One of my granddaughters, she was really little, they started, you know, So You Think You Can Dance. You know, she called it Think So You Can Dance. And I think, oh, that makes sense too. But, you know, this whole idea of dance, you've heard these commentators, right, Angela, that they say, oh, you're so graceful, right? I mean, that's a word that they use when they talk about dancers. Now, what's graceful about it is that when you dance, there is one who leads and one who follows. Okay? And have you ever seen two people dance where two people are trying to lead? You know, it's just herky-jerky, I'm going my way, I'm going your way, you know. And it's like, there's no grace in that at all. It's just all this herky-jerky junk going on, you know. You think, but when one person submits themselves to the other's lead, what happens? Man, it can look beautiful. I mean, they just like flow across the dance floor. Why? Because one has submitted to the other. And this is what grace is. It's us submitting ourselves to the grace of God and then allowing Him to continue to lead in our life. And as we step with that, we become graceful in our relationship with everybody else. So grace, then, is humbling. That God opposes the proud, but He gives favor to the humble. Right? So number one, we need to be humble. Okay? Now the next one, he says, so resist the devil and he will flee from you. Now what does that mean? Well, I had a girlfriend in high school. Actually, she wasn't my girlfriend. She was for a little while. I was trying to woo her. I really loved her. Okay? Deep down, I mean, my desire was great. But, spent a lot of money on this girl, and took her out, did nice things and stuff. And, even kissed her a couple times. But, I go over to her house. You'll never guess what happened. She meets me at the front door, doesn't let me in, like she normally did. And then she started to tell me that she didn't like me that much anymore. And that she found somebody else and she wanted to be friends. Yeah, okay, yeah. All right. Like that's gonna happen. Okay, so what did I do? I got in my car and I just about ran into a telephone pole. I got out of there quick, baby. Okay. Now, I know this analogy makes me the devil, all right? She was resisting me. What did I do? I flee. That's right. Absolutely. I got out of there fast. Think about it this way. When you are tempted to engage somebody with negative talk and be angry and have this war with somebody, fracture the relationship, you're tempted to go there. What we need to do is say, you know what? I have a prior engagement. I'm in love with somebody else. And I'm not going to give you the time of day. Okay? And when we do that, we say, I am so committed to the God who's given so much to pour His grace out of me, to love me so much that I don't have even time to listen to you. Matter of fact, you're trying to get me to do something, and I'm not going to do it. There's no way. All right? So resist the devil, and the Bible says he will flee. But what we do is we have to show Satan how committed we are to God. Bottom line. Now that leads in right to the next thing that James says. It's a very logical line of logic here. He says, okay, so what's the next thing you have to do? He says, come to God and God will come near to you. So come closer to God. The whole thing about peacemaking is how close to God are you coming? See, because one side, the thing that fractures relationships is selfishness. The thing that mends relationships is coming close to God. Submit yourself to His lead in your life. And then the next issue is what? Whoops, I'll just blank the thing out. The next issue is, so wash your hands, you sinners, purify your hearts, for your loyalty is divided between God and the world. What he's saying here is, if you are going to come close to God, what you have to do is get rid of the stuff that's tempting you to fracture those relationships. If you're fighting over the TV remote all the time, get rid of the TV. Right? And go take a walk with your wife or your husband. Right? Spend some time doing something else. If something always is causing tension, get rid of that thing and concentrate on relationship. The main thing that I do when I do marriage counseling is I try to help couples understand that their relationship is more important than winning an argument. At the end of the day, you have to look each other in the eye and say, I love you so much that I'm not willing to argue about this stuff. Me getting my way or winning this argument is not worth losing my relationship with you. You understand that? So what we have to do is sometimes just get rid of the stuff that's causing all the problems. Some of the biggest problems in marriage, one of the biggest problems is money. How we spend our money. What are we going to spend it on? One person just spends it like water. The other person wants to just hoard it and never ever spend it. Right? You've got to come to agreement somehow. You let somebody be in charge of the checkbook or whatever it is, but you've got to have a conversation that says, what are we going to do with our money that's going to make us feel like we love each other more? Instead of always being at odds with each other, always fighting about stuff. And so sometimes we just have to, get rid of the stuff that's causing the problem in the first place. I had people that have broken relationships because, they got so invested in their house and they started arguing about what they're going to do and what they're going to paint, what kind of carpet they're going to have. And it's just like every day was a hassle. It's like, go live outside if it's going to make your relationship better. Okay? So we have to understand there are certain things, there are certain cues that cause these eruptions. I want my way, you want your way. Let's forget about that. Let's say, you know what? The most important thing is our relationship with God. Come close to God. And then, next thing, come close to each other. Let's do what is going to build our relationship with each other. And if we do that, we concentrate on that, then things kind of, go calm on us. And that's a good thing, right? Now he goes on and he says this. He says, let there be tears for what you've done. Let there be sorrow and deep grief. Let there be sadness instead of laughter and gloom instead of joy. What he's saying is, when you've blown it in a relationship, what you need to do is understand the brokenness you've created. You've hurt someone. You've pushed them away. Is having our way, our stuff, doing things the way we want, is that worth breaking the relationship with another person over? When we realize the brokenness and the hurt that we inflict on other people because we don't like it that way, or we don't want to do it your way, we want to do it my way, and that escalates into an argument so much that it fractures your relationship, we need to weep over that. Because why? Because every commandment that God gives, it revolves around two issues. One is either about a relationship with God, or two, a relationship with people. Look at the 10 Commandments. Every one of those commandments has to do about our relationship with God or how we relate with other people. What's the most important thing Jesus said? Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength, body, everything you got. And what? And love your neighbor like you love yourself. He says all the commandments hang on these two. Every other commandment that God gives is really built on the bedrock of loving God and loving other people. And so we've got to make that the most important thing. We have to. And so it starts with humility. It then goes to confession. It goes to this place of saying, I am not willing to be committed to anything else but my commitment to God. I'm going to draw close to God. I'm going to get rid of anything that's distracting me and drawing me into worldly pleasure. And then I am going to make my relationships a priority. And the way that we do that, he goes on, he says this, humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up with honor. He will honor you if you remain humble. You remain humble. And then, I love the way he ends it. He says, so don't speak evil against each other. He says, don't criticize or judge one another. Then that you are criticizing and judging God's law. What he's saying here simply is this, is that when we judge other people, what we're doing is we are taking the place of God. We are now saying, you remember the 10 Commandments that God gave? Well, here's the 10 Commandments that Bruce has given. All right? And I want you to live this way. I want you to talk this way. I want you to walk this way. I want you to invest your time and energy and money this way. And if you live according to Bruce, it's going to be good. You see what God is saying? When you start judging other people, you're trying to take God's place. You're trying to order the world instead of allowing God to order the world. Okay? And so he said, don't do that. Matter of fact, then he goes on, and then he really nails us between the eyes, right? He says that your job is to obey the law, not judge whether it applies to you or to you. God alone, who gave the law, is the judge. He alone has the power to save or destroy. So what right do you have to judge your neighbor? In other words, what he's saying is, hey, concentrate on your own issues. Okay? I mean, you get so uptight. Most of our blowouts with other people have to do with the fact that we're judging them. We're trying to order their world. We're trying to say how they're supposed to respond to us, or what they're supposed to do, or what they're not supposed to do. We're being the lawgiver. And God says, you know what? Just worry about yourself. How good are you doing in relating to God? Are you drawing close to God? Are you eliminating those things that are distracting you from your relationship to God? Are you building your life around this relationship? And then are you allowing that relationship to humble you to the point to where you realize that you're no better than your friend. You're no better than your spouse. You both have your shortcomings. And if you learn to extend grace like you've been given grace, all of a sudden, peace can reign. Make sense? So we step forward in humility. And mutual submission is the way we run in the church, in relationships. We have to say both of us can be wrong at any given moment. And most of the time it's true. Right? And so we just humbly move forward together and we say, you know what? What steps we're going to take? We're going to step that are going to enhance our relationships, not destroy them. And if we do that, then we honor God. And peace can reign. All right? All right. We do.